Chapter 18 of The Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Heritage of the Desert. Mescal's far out in front by this time. Depend on it, Hare, went on Naab. That trick was the cunning Indian of her. She'll ride Silvermane into White Sage tomorrow night. Then she'll hide from Snap. The bishop will take care of her. She'll be safe for the present in White Sage. Now we must bury these men. Tomorrow, my son, then. What then? Hare straightened up. Unutterable pain darkened the flame in the Mormon's gaze. For an instant his face worked spasmodically, only to stiffen into a stony mask. It was the old conflict once more, the never-ending war between flesh and spirit. And now the flesh had prevailed. "The time has come," said George Naab. "Yes," replied his father harshly. A great calm settled over Hare. His blood ceased to race, his mind to riot. In August Naab's momentous words he knew the old man had found himself. At last he had learned the lesson of the desert, to strike first and hard. "Zeke, hitch up a team," said August Naab. "No, wait a moment. Here comes Piute. Let's hear what he has to say." Piute appeared on the zigzag cliff trail, driving a burro at dangerous speed. "He sighted Silvermane and the rustlers," suggested George, as the shepherd approached. Naab translated the excited Indian's mingling of Navajo and Piute languages to mean just what George had said. Snap ahead of riders. Silvermane far, far ahead of Snap, running fast. Damn. "Mescal's pushing him hard to make the sand strip," said George. "Piute, 3 fires tonight. Lookout point." The order meant the execution of August Naab's hurry signal for the Navajos, and after he had given it he waved the Indian toward the cliff, lapsed into a silence which no one dared to break. Naab consigned the bodies of the rustlers to the famous cemetery under the red wall. He laid Dene in grave 31. It was the grave that the outlaw had promised as the last resting place of Dene's spy. Chance and Culver he buried together. It was noteworthy that no Mormon rites were conferred on Culver, once a Mormon in good standing, nor were any prayers spoken over the open graves. What did August Naab intend to do? That was the question in Hare's mind as he left the house. It was a silent day, warm as summer. Though the sun was overcast with gray clouds, the birds were quiet in the trees. There was no bray of burro or clarion call of peacock. Even the hum of the river had fallen into silence. Hare wandered over the farm and down the red lane, brooding over the issue. Naab's few words had been full of meaning. The cold gloom so foreign to his nature had been even more impressive. His had been the revolt of the meek, the gentle, the loving, the administering. The spiritual uses of his life had failed. Hare recalled what the desert had done to his own nature, how it had bred in him its impulse to fight, to resist, to survive. If he, a stranger of a few years, could be molded in the flaming furnace of its fiery life, what then must be the caste of August Naab, born on the desert and sleeping 5 nights out of 7 on the sands for 60 years? The desert. Hare trembled as he grasped all its meaning. Then he slowly resolved that meaning. There was the measureless distance to narrow the eye and teach restraint, the untrodden trails, the shifting sands, the thorny brakes, the broken lava to pierce the flesh, the heights and depths unscalable and unplumbed. All over the sun, red and burning. The parched plants of the desert fought for life, growing far apart, sending enormous roots deep to pierce the sand and split the rock for moisture, arming every leaf with a barbed thorn or poisoned sap, never thriving and ever thirsting. The creatures of the desert endured the sun and lived without water, and were at endless war. The hawk had keener eye than his fellow of more fruitful lands, sharper beak, greater spread of wings, and claws of deeper curve. For him there was little to eat, a rabbit now, a rock rat then. Nature made his swoop like lightning, and it never missed its aim. The gaunt wolf never failed in his sure scent, in his silent hunt. The lizard flicked an invisible tongue into the heart of a flower, and the bee he caught stung with a poisoned sting. The battle of life went to the strong. So the desert trained each of its wild things to survive. No eye of the desert but burned with the flame of the sun. To kill or to escape death, that was the dominant motive. To fight barrenness and heat, that was stern enough, but each creature must fight his fellow. What then of the men who drifted into the desert and survived? They must of necessity endure the wind and heat, the drought and famine. They must grow lean and hard, keen-eyed and silent. The weak, the humble, the sacrificing must be winnowed from among them. As each man developed, he took on some aspect of the desert. Holderness had the amber clearness of its distances in his eyes, its deceit in his soul. August Naab, the magnificence of the desert pine in his giant form, its strength in his heart. Snap Naab, the cast of the hawk beak in his face, its cruelty in his nature. But all shared alike the common element of survival, ferocity. August Naab had subdued his to the prompting of a Christ-like spirit, yet did not his very energy, his wonderful tirelessness, his will to achieve, his power to resist, partake of that fierceness? Moreover, after many struggles, he too had been overcome by the desert's call for blood. His mystery was no longer a mystery. Always in those moments of revelation which he disclaimed, he had seen himself as faithful to the desert in the end. Hare's slumbers that night were broken. He dreamed of a great gray horse leaping into the sky from cloud to cloud, with the lightning and the thunder under his hoofs, the storm winds sweeping from his silver mane. He dreamed of Mescal's brooding eyes. They were dark gateways of the desert, open only to him, and he entered to chase the alluring stars deep into the purple distance. He dreamed of himself waiting in serene confidence for some unknown thing to pass. He awakened late in the morning and found the house hushed. The day wore on in a repose unstirred by breeze and sound, in accord with the mourning of August Naab. At noon, a solemn procession wended its slow course to the shadow of the red cliff and as solemnly returned. Then a long drawn, piercing Indian whoop broke the midday hush. It heralded the approach of the Navajos. In single file they rode up the lane, and when the falcon-eyed Eschtah dismounted before his white friend, the line of his warriors still turned the corner of the red wall. Next to the chieftain rode Scarbreast, the grim warlord of the Navajos. His followers trailed into the grove. Their sinewy bronze bodies, almost naked, glistened wet from the river. Full 100 strong were they, a silent, lean-limbed desert troop. "The White Prophet's fires burn bright," said the chieftain. "Eschtah is here." "The Navajo is a friend," replied Naab. "The white man needs counsel and help. He has fallen upon evil days." "Eschtah sees war in the eyes of his friend." "War, chief, war. Let the Navajo and his warriors rest and eat. Then we shall speak." A single command from the Navajo broke the waiting files of warriors. Mustangs were turned into the fields. Packs were unstrapped from the burros. Blankets spread under the cottonwoods. When the afternoon waned and the shade of the western wall crept into the oasis, August Naab came from his cabin, clad in buckskins, with a large blue Colt swinging handle outward from his left hip. He ordered his sons to replenish the fire which had been built in the circle. When the fierce-eyed Indians gathered round the blaze, he called to his women to bring meat and drink. Hare's unnatural calmness had prevailed until he saw Naab stride out to front the waiting Indians. Then a ripple of cold passed over him. He leaned against the tree in the shadow and watched the gray-faced giant stalking to and fro before his Indian friends. A long while he strode in the circle of light, to pause at length before the chieftains and to break the impressive silence with his deep voice. Eschtah sees before him a friend stung to his heart. Men of his own color have long injured him, yet have lived. The Mormon loved his fellows and forgave. 5 sons he laid in their graves, yet his heart was not hardened. His firstborn went the trail of the firewater, and is an outcast from his people. Many enemies has he, and one is a chief. He has killed the white man's friend, stolen his cattle and his water. Today the white man laid another son in his grave. What think the chief? Would he not crush the scorpion that stung him? The old Navajo answered in speech, which, when translated, was as stately as the Mormon's. Eschtah respects his friend, but he has not thought him wise. The white prophet sees visions of things to come, but his blood is cold. He asks too much of the white man's God. He is a chief. He has an eye like the lightning, an arm strong as the pine, yet he has not struck. Eschtah grieves. He does not wish to shed blood for pleasure. But Eschtah's friend has let too many selfish men cross his range and drink at his springs. Only a few can live on the desert. Let him who has found the springs and the trails keep them for his own. Let him who came too late go away to find for himself, to prove himself a warrior, or let his bones whiten in the sand. The Navajo counsels his white friend to kill. "The great Eschtah speaks wise words," said Naab. "The white prophet is richer for them. He will lay aside the prayers to his unseeing God, and will seek his foe." "It is well." "The white man's foe is strong," went on the Mormon. "He has many men. They will fight. If Eschtah sends his braves with his friend, there will be war. Many braves will fall. The white prophet wishes to save them if he can. He will go forth alone to kill his foe. If the sun sets 4 times and the white man is not here, then Eschtah will send his great war chief and his warriors. They will kill whom they find at the white man's springs. And thereafter half of all the white man's cattle that were stolen shall be Eschtah's, so that he watch over the water and range." "Eschtah greets a chief," answered the Indian. "The white prophet knows he will kill his enemy, but he is not sure he will return. He is not sure that the little braves of his foe will fly like the winds, yet he hopes. So he holds the Navajo back to the last. Eschtah will watch the sun set 4 times. If his white friend returns, he will rejoice. If he does not return, the Navajo will send his warriors on the trail." August Naab walked swiftly from the circle of light into the darkness. His heavy steps sounded on the porch and in the hallway. His 3 sons went toward their cabins with bowed heads and silent tongues. Eschtah folded his blanket about him and stalked off into the gloom of the grove, followed by his warriors. Hare remained in the shadow of the cottonwood where he had stood unnoticed. He had not moved a muscle since he had heard August Naab's declaration. That one word of Naab's intention alone had arrested him. for it had struck in his heart and mind. It had paralyzed him with the revelation it brought, for Hare knew now, as he had never known anything before, that he would forestall August Naab, avenge the death of Dave, and kill the rustler Holderness. Through blinding shock he passed slowly into cold acceptance of his heritage from the desert. 2 long years of his desert training were as an open page to Hare's unveiled eyes. The life he owed to August Naab, the strength built up by the old man's knowledge of the healing power of the plateau and range, these lay in a long curve between the day Naab had lifted him out of the White Sage trail and this day of the Mormon's extremity. A long curve with Holderness's insulting blow at the beginning, his murder of a beloved friend at the end. For Hare remembered the blow and never would forget Dave's last words. Yet unforgettable as these were, it was duty rather than revenge that called him. This was August Naab's hour of need. Hare knew himself to be the tool of inscrutable fate. He was the one to fight the old desert-scarred Mormon's battle. Hare recalled how humbly he had expressed his gratitude to Naab, and the apparent impossibility of ever repaying him. And then Naab's reply: "Lad, you can never tell how one man may repay another." Hare could pay his own debt and that of many wanderers who had drifted across the sands to find a home with the Mormon. These men stirred in their graves, and from out the shadow of the cliff whispered the voice of Mescal's nameless father. "Is there no one to rise up for this old hero of the desert?" Softly Hare slipped into his room. Putting on coat and belt and catching up his rifle, he stole out again stealthily, like an Indian. In the darkness of the wagon shed he felt for his saddle, and finding it, he groped with eager hands for the grain box. Raising the lid, he filled a measure with grain and emptied it into his saddle bag. Then, lifting the saddle, he carried it out of the yard, through the gate and across the lane to the corrals. The wilder mustangs in the far corral began to kick and snort, and those in the corral where Black Bolly was kept trooped noisily to the bars. Bolly whinnied and thrust her black muzzle over the fence. Hare placed a caressing hand on her while he waited, listening and watching. It was not unusual for the mustangs to get restless at any time, and Hare was confident that this would pass without investigation. Gradually the restless stamping and suspicious snorting ceased, and Hare, letting down the bar, led Bolly out into the lane. It was the work of a moment to saddle her. His bridle hung where he always kept it, on the pommel, and with nimble fingers he shortened the several straps to fit Bolly's head, and slipped the bit between her teeth. Then he put up the bars of the gate. Before mounting, he stood a moment thinking coolly, deliberately numbering the several necessities he must not forget: grain for Bolly, food for himself, his Colt and Winchester, cartridges, canteen, matches, knife. He inserted a hand into one of his saddlebags, expecting to find some strips of meat. The bag was empty. He felt in the other one, and under the grain he found what he sought. The canteen lay in the coil of his lasso tied to the saddle, and its heavy canvas covering was damp to his touch. With that, he thrust the long Winchester into its saddle sheath and swung his leg over the mustang. The house of the Naabs was dark and still. The dying council fire cast flickering shadows under the black cottonwoods where the Navajo slept. The faint breeze that rustled the leaves brought the low sullen roar of the river. He guided Bolly into the thick dust of the lane, laid the bridle loosely on her neck for her to choose the trail, and silently rode out into the lonely desert night. End of chapter 18. 19 of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Unleashed, Part 1. Hare, listening breathlessly, rode on toward the gateway of the cliffs, and when he had passed the corner of the wall, he sighed in relief. Spurring Bolly into a trot, he rode forward with a strange elation. He had slipped out of the oasis unheard, and it would be morning before August Naab discovered his absence. Perhaps longer before he divined his purpose. Then Hare would have a long start. He thrilled with something akin to fear when he pictured the old man's rage, and wondered what change it would make in his plans. Hare saw in mind Naab and his sons, and the Navajos sweeping in pursuit to save him from the rustlers. But the future must take care of itself, and he addressed all the faculties at his command to cool consideration of the present. The strip of sand under the Blue Star had to be crossed at night, a feat which even the Navajos did not have to their credit. Yet Hare had no shrinking. He had no doubt. He must go on. As he had been drawn to the Painted Desert by a voiceless call, so now he was urged forward by something nameless. In the blackness of the night it seemed as if he were riding through a vaulted hall swept by a current of air. The night had turned cold. The stars had brightened icily. The rumble of the river had died away when Bolly's ringing trot suddenly changed to a noiseless, floundering walk. She had come upon the sand. Hare saw the Blue Star in the cliff, and once more loosed the rein on Bolly's neck. She stopped and champed at her bit, and turned her black head to him as if to intimate that she wanted the guidance of a sure arm. But as it was not forthcoming, she stepped onward into the yielding sand. With hands resting idly on the pommel, Hare sat at ease in the saddle. The billowy dunes reflected the pale starlight and fell away from him to darken in obscurity. So long as the Blue Star remained in sight, he kept his sense of direction. When it had disappeared, he felt himself lost. Bolly's course seemed as crooked as the jagged outline of the cliffs. She climbed straight up little knolls, descended them at an angle, turned sharply at wind-washed gullies, made winding detours, zigzagged levels that shone like a polished floor, and at last, so it seemed to Hare, she doubled back on her trail. The black cliff receded over the waves of sand. The stars changed positions, traveled round in the blue dome, and the few that he knew finally sank below the horizon. Bolly never lagged. She was like the homeward bound horse, indifferent to direction because sure of it, eager to finish the journey because now it was short. Hare was glad, though not surprised, when she snorted and cracked her iron-shod hoof on a stone at the edge of the sand. He smiled with tightening lips as he rode into the shadow of a rock which he recognized. Bolly had crossed the treacherous belt of dunes and washes and had struck the trail on the other side. The long level of wind-carved rocks under the cliffs, the ridges of the desert, the miles of slow ascent up to the rough divide, the gradual descent to the cedars, these stretches of the journey took the night hours and ended with the brightening gray in the east. Within a mile of Silvercup Spring, Hare dismounted to tie folded pads of buckskin on Bolly's hoofs. When her feet were muffled, he cautiously advanced on the trail for the matter of 100 yards or more, then sheered off to the right into the cedars. He led Bolly slowly, without rattling a stone or snapping a twig, and stopped every few paces to listen. There was no sound other than the wind in the cedars. Presently, with a gasp, he caught the dull gleam of a burned-out campfire. Then his movements became as guarded, as noiseless as those of a scouting Indian. The dawn broke over the red wall as he gained the trail beyond the spring. He skirted the curve of the valley and led Bolly a little way up the wooded slope to a dense thicket of aspens in a hollow. This thicket encircled a patch of grass. Hare pressed the lithe aspens aside to admit Bolly and left her there free. He drew his rifle from its sheath, and after assuring himself that the mustang could not be seen or heard from below, he bent his steps diagonally up the slope. Every foot of this ground he knew, and he climbed swiftly until he struck the mountain trail. Then, descending, he entered the cedars. At last he reached a point directly above the cliff camp where he had spent so many days, and this, he knew, overhung the cabin built by Holderness. He stole down from tree to tree and slipped from thicket to thicket. The sun, red as blood, raised a bright crescent over the red wall. The soft mists of the valley began to glow and move. Cattle were working in toward the spring. Never brushing a branch, never dislodging a stone, Hare descended the slope, his eyes keener, his ears sharper with every step. Soon the edge of the gray stone cliff below shut out the lower levels of cedars. While resting, he listened. Then he marked his course down the last bit of slanting ground to the cliff bench which faced the valley. This space was open, rough with crumbling rock and dead cedar brush, a difficult place to cross without sound. Deliberate in his choice of steps, very slow in moving, Hare went on with a stealth which satisfied even his intent ear. When the wide gray strip of stone drew slowly into the circle of his downcast glance, he sank to the ground with a slight trembling in all his limbs. There was a thick bush on the edge of the cliff. In 3 steps he could reach it, and, unseeing himself, look down upon the camp. A little cloud or smoke rose lazily and capped a slender column of blue. Sounds were wafted slowly upward, the low voices of men in conversation, a merry whistle, and then the humming of a tune. Hare's mouth was dry and his temples throbbed as he asked himself what it was best to do. The answer came instantaneously, as though it had lain just below the level of his conscious thought. "I'll watch till Holderness walks out into sight, jump up with a yell when he comes, give him time to see me, to draw his gun, then kill him." He slipped to the bush, drew in a deep long breath that stilled his agitation, and peered over the cliff. The crude shingles of the cabin first rose into sight. Then beyond he saw the corral with a number of shaggy mustangs and a great gray horse. Hare stared blankly. As in a dream, he saw the proud arch of a splendid neck, the graceful wave of a white crested mane. "Silvermane! My God!" he gasped suddenly. They caught him, after all. He fell backward upon the cliff and lay there with hands clinching his rifle, shudderingly conscious of a blow, trying to comprehend its meaning. "Silvermane! They caught him after all!" he kept repeating. Then, in a flash of agonized understanding, he whispered, "Mescal! Mescal!" He rolled upon his face, shutting out the blue sky. His body stretched stiff as a bent spring released from its compress, and his nails dented the stock of his rifle. Then the rigidity softened to sobs that shook him from head to foot. He sat up, haggard and wide-eyed. Silvermane had been captured, probably by rustlers waiting at the western end of the sand strip. Mescal had fallen into the hands of Snap Naab. But Mescal was surely alive, and Snap was there to be killed. His long career of unrestrained cruelty was in its last day. Something told Hare that this thing must and should be. The stern deliberation of his intent to kill Holderness, the passion of his purpose to pay his debt to August Naab, were as nothing compared to the gathering might of his new resolve. Suddenly he felt free and strong as an untamed lion broken free from his captors. From the cover of the bush he peered again over the cliff. The cabin, with its closed door facing him, was scarcely 200 feet down from his hiding place. One of the rustlers sang as he bent over the campfire and raked the coals around the pots. Others lounged on a bench, waiting for breakfast. Some rolled out of their blankets. They stretched and yawned, and pulling on their boots, made for the spring. The last man to rise was Snap Naab, and he had slept with his head on the threshold of the door. Evidently, Snap had made Mescal a prisoner in the cabin, and no one could go in or out without stepping upon him. The rustler foreman of Holderness's company had slept with his belt containing 2 Colts, nor had he removed his boots. Hare noted these details with grim humor. Now the tall Holderness, face shining, gold red beard agleam, rounded the cabin whistling. Hare watched the rustlers sit down to breakfast, and here and there caught a loud spoken word, and marked their leisurely, carefree manner. Snap took up a pan of food and a cup of coffee, carried them into the cabin, and came out, shutting the door. After breakfast, most of the rustlers set themselves to their various tasks. Hare watched them with the eyes of a lynx watching deer. Several men were arranging articles for packing, and their actions were slow to the point of laziness. Others trooped down toward the corral. Holderness rolled a cigarette and stooped over the campfire to reach a burning stick. Snap Naab stalked to and fro before the door of the cabin. He alone of the rustlers' band showed restlessness, and more than once he glanced up the trail that led over the divide toward his father's oasis. Holderness sent expectant glances in the other direction, toward Seeping Springs. Once his clear voice rang out. "I tell you, Naab, there's no hurry. We'll ride in tomorrow." 1,000 thoughts flitted through Hare's mind, a steady stream of questions and answers. Why did Snap look anxiously along the oasis trail? It was not that he feared his father or his brothers alone, but there was always the menace of the Navajos. Why was Holderness in no hurry to leave Silver Cup? Why did he lag at the spring when, if he expected riders from his ranch, he could have gone on to meet them, obviously saving time and putting greater distance between him and the man he had wronged? Was it utter fearlessness or only a deep played game? Holderness and his rustlers, all except the gloomy Naab, were blind to the peril that lay beyond the divide. How soon would August Naab strike out on the White Sage trail? Would he come alone? Whether he came alone or at the head of his hard riding Navajos, he would arrive too late. Holderness's life was not worth a pinch of the ashes he flecked so carelessly from his cigarette. Snap Naab's gloom, his long stride, his nervous hand always on or near the butt of his Colt, spoke the keenness of his desert instinct. For him, the sun had arisen red over the red wall. Had he harmed Mescal? Why did he keep the cabin door shut and guard it so closely? While Hare watched and thought, the hours sped by. Holderness lounged about, and Snap kept silent guard. The rustlers smoked, slept, and moved about. The day waned, and the shadow of the cliff crept over the cabin. To Hare, the time had been as a moment. He was amazed to find the sun had gone down behind Coconina. If August Naab had left the oasis at dawn, he must now be near the divide, unless he had been delayed by a windstorm at the strip of sand. Hare longed to see the roan charger come up over the crest. He longed to see a file of Navajos, plumes waving, dark mustangs gleaming in the red light, sweep down the stony ridge toward the cedars. "If they come," he whispered, "I'll kill Holderness and Snap and any man who tries to open that cabin door." So he waited in tense watchfulness. his gaze alternating between the wavy line of the divide and the camp glade. Out in the valley it was still daylight, but under the cliff twilight had fallen. All day Hare had strained his ears to hear the talk of the rustlers, and it now occurred to him that if he climbed down through the split in the cliff to the bench where Dave and George had always hidden to watch the spring, he would be just above the cabin. This descent involved risk, but since it would enable him to see the cabin door when darkness set in, he decided to venture. The moment was propitious, for the rustlers were bustling around, cooking dinner, unrolling blankets, and moving to and fro from spring and corral. Hare crawled back a few yards and along the cliff until he reached the split. It was a narrow, steep crack which he well remembered. Going down was attended with two dangers: losing his hold and the possible rattling of stones. Face foremost, he slipped down with the gliding, sinuous movement of a snake, and reaching the grassy bench, he lay quiet. Jesting voices and loud laughter from below reassured him. He had not been heard. His new position afforded every chance to see and hear, and also gave means of rapid, noiseless retreat along the bench to the cedars. Lying flat, he crawled stealthily to the bushy fringe of the bench. A bright fire blazed under the cliff. Men were moving and laughing. The cabin door was open. Mescal stood leaning back from Snap Naab, struggling to release her hands. "Let me untie them, I say," growled Snap. Mescal tore loose from him and stepped back. Her hands were bound before her, and twisting them outward, she warded him off. Her disheveled hair almost hid her dark eyes. They burned in a level glance of hate and defiance. She was a little lioness, quivering with fiery life, fight in every line of her form. "All right, don't eat then. Starve," said Snap. "I'll starve before I eat what you give me." The rustlers laughed. Holderness blew out a puff of smoke and smiled. Snap glowered upon Mescal, and then upon his amiable companions. One of them, a ruddy-faced fellow, walked toward Mescal. "Cool down, Snap, cool down," he said. "We're not going to stand for a girl starving. She ain't eat a bite yet. Here, miss, let me untie your hands. There. Say, Naab, damn you, her wrists are black and blue." "Look out, your gun!" yelled Snap. With a swift movement, Mescal snatched the man's Colt from its holster and was raising it when he grasped her arm. She winced and dropped the weapon. "You little Indian devil!" exclaimed the rustler in rapt admiration. "Sorry to hurt you, and more sorry to spoil your aim. That wasn't kind to throw my own gun on me, just after I played the gentleman, now was it?" "I didn't intend to shoot you," panted Mescal. "Naab, is this your Mormon kind of wife? Excuse me, though I ain't denying she's the sassiest and sweetest little cat I ever seen." "We Mormons don't talk about our women or hear any talk," returned Snap, a dancing fury in his pale eyes. "You're from Nebraska?" "Yes, just a plain Nebraska rustler, cattle thief, and all round no good customer, though I ain't taken to hounding women yet." For answer, Snap's right hand slowly curved upward before him and stopped taut and inflexible, while his strange eyes seemed to shoot sparks. "See here, Naab, why do you want to throw a gun on me?" asked the rustler coolly. "Haven't you shot enough of your friends yet? I reckon I've no right to interfere in your affairs. I was only protesting friendly like for the little lady. She's game, and she's called your hand, and it's not a straight hand. That's all, and damn if I care whether you're a Mormon or not. I'll bet a horse Holderness will back me up." "Snap, he's right," put in Holderness smoothly. "You needn't be so touchy about Mescal. She showed what little use she's got for you. If you must rope her around like you do a mustang, be easy about it. Let's have supper. Now, Mescal, You sit here on the bench and behave yourself. I don't want you shooting up my camp." Snap turned sullenly aside while Holderness seated Mescal near the door and fetched her food and drink. The rustlers squatted round the campfire, and conversation ceased in the business of the meal. End of chapter 19, part 1. Of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Unleashed, part 2. To Hare, the scene had brought a storm of emotions. Joy at the sight of Mescal, blessed relief to see her unscathed, pride in her fighting spirit. These came side by side with gratitude to the kind Nebraska rustler. Strange, deepening insight into Holderness's game, unextinguishable, white-hot hatred of Snap Naab. And binding all was the ever-mounting will to rescue Mescal, which was held in check by an inexorable judgment. He must continue to wait, and he did wait with blind faith in the something to be, keeping ever in mind the last resort, the rifle he clutched with eager hands. Meanwhile, the darkness descended, the fire sent forth a brighter blaze, and the rustlers finished their supper. Mescal arose and stepped across the threshold of the cabin door. "Hold on," ordered Snap, as he approached with swift strides. "Stick out your hands." Some of the rustlers grumbled, and one blurted out, "Aw, no, Snap, don't tie her up, no." "Who says no?" hissed the Mormon with snapping teeth. As he wheeled upon them, his Colt seemed to leap forward, and suddenly quivered at arm's length, gleaming in the ruddy fire rays. Holderness laughed in the muzzle of the weapon. "Go ahead, Snap. Tie up your lady love. What a tame little wife she's going to make you. Tie her up, but do it without hurting her." The rustlers growled or laughed at their leader's order. Snap turned to his task. Mescal stood in the doorway and shrinkingly extended her clasped hands. Holderness whirled to the fire with a look which betrayed his game. Snap bound Mescal's hands securely, thrust her inside the cabin, and after hesitating for a long moment, finally shut the door. "It's funny about a woman now, ain't it?" said Nebraska confidentially to a companion. "One minute she'll snatch you bald-headed, the next she'll melt in your mouth like sugar, and I'll be darned if the chamberlainest one ain't the kind to hold a fellow longest. But it's hell. I was married onct. Not any more for mine. A pal I had used to say that whiskey riled him, that rattlesnake poisoned up his blood some, but it took a woman to make 'em plumb bad. Damned if it ain't so. Where there's a woman around there's something always coming off." But the strain, instead of relaxing, became portentous. Holderness suddenly showed he was ill at ease. He appeared to be expecting arrivals from the direction of Seeping Springs. Snap Naab leaned against the side of the door, his narrow gaze cunningly studying the rustlers before him. More than any other, he had caught a foreshadowing. Like the desert hawk, he could see afar. Suddenly he pressed back against the door, half opening it while he faced the men. "Stop!" commanded Holderness. The change in his voice was as if it had come from another man. "You don't go in there." "I'm going to take the girl and ride to White Sage," replied Naab, in slow deliberation. "Bah! You say that only for an excuse to get into the cabin with her. You tried it last night and I blocked you. Shut the door, Naab, or something'll happen." "There's more going to happen than ever you think of, Holderness. Don't interfere now. I'm going." "Well, go ahead, but you won't take the girl." Snap Naab swung off the step, slamming the door behind him. "So ho!" he exclaimed sneeringly. "That's why you've made me foreman, eh?" His claw-like hand moved almost imperceptibly upward, while his pale eyes strove to pierce the strength behind Holderness's effrontery. The rustler chief had a trump card to play, one that showed in his sardonic smile. "Naab, you don't get the girl." "Maybe you'll get her," hissed Snap. "I always intended to." Surely never before had passion driven Snap's hand to such speed. His Colt gleamed in the campfire light. Click, click, click. The hammer fell upon empty chambers. "Hell!" he shrieked. Holderness laughed sarcastically. "That's where you're going," he cried. "Here's to Naab's trick with a gun. Bah!" And he shot his foreman through the heart. Snap plunged upon his face. His hands beat the ground like the shuffling wings of a wounded partridge. His fingers gripped the dust, spread convulsively, straightened, and sank limp. Holderness called through the door of the cabin. "Mescal, I've rid you of your would-be husband. Cheer up." Then, pointing to the fallen man, he said to the nearest bystanders, "Some of you drag that out for the coyotes." The first fellow who bent over Snap happened to be the Nebraska rustler, and he curiously opened the breech of the 6-shooter he picked up. "No shells," he said. He pulled Snap's second Colt from his belt and unbreeched that. "No shells? Well, damn me!" He surveyed the group of grim men, not one of whom made any reply. Holderness again laughed harshly, and turning to the cabin, he fastened the door with a lasso. It was a long time before Hare recovered from the startling revelation of the plot which had put Mescal into Holderness's power. Bad as Snap Naab had been, he would have married her, and such a fate was infinitely preferable to the one that now menaced her. Hare changed his position and settled himself to watch and wait out the night. Every hour Holderness and his men tarried at Silver Cup hastened their approaching doom. Hare's strange prescience of the fatality that overshadowed these men had received its first verification in the sudden taking off of Snap Naab. The deep scheming Holderness, confident that his strong band meant sure protection, sat and smoked and smiled beside the campfire. He had not caught even a hint of Snap Naab's suggested warning. Yet somewhere out there on the oasis trail rode a man who, once turned from the saving of life to the lust to kill, would be as immutable as death itself. Behind him waited a troop of Navajos, swift as eagles, merciless as wolves, desert warriors with the sun-heated blood of generations in their veins. As Hare waited and watched, with all his inner being cold, he could almost feel pity for Holderness. His doom was close. Twice, when the rustler chief had sauntered nearer to the cabin door, as if to enter, Hare had covered him with a rifle, waiting for the step upon the threshold. But Holderness always checked himself in time, and Hare's finger eased its pressure upon the trigger. The night closed in black. The clouded sky gave forth no starlight. The wind rose and moaned through the cedars. One by one the rustlers rolled in their blankets and all dropped into slumber while the campfire slowly burned down. The night hours wore on to the soft wail of the breeze and the wild notes of far off trailing coyotes. Hare, watching sleeplessly, saw one of the prone figures stir. The man raised himself very cautiously. He glanced at his companions and looked long at Holderness, who lay squarely in the dimming light. Then he softly lowered himself. Hare wondered what the rustler meant to do. Presently he again lifted his head and turned it as if listening intently. His companions were motionless in deep breathing sleep. Gently he slipped aside his blankets and began to rise. He was slow and guarded of movement. It took him long to stand erect. He stepped between the rustlers with stocking feet which were as noiseless as an Indian's, and he went toward the cabin door. He softly edged round the sleeping Holderness, showing a glinting 6-shooter in his hand. Hare's resolve to kill him before he reached the door was checked. What did it mean, this rustler's stealthy movements, his passing by Holderness with his drawn weapon? Again doom hovered over the rustler chief. If he stirred, Hare knew instantly that this softly stepping man was a Mormon who was true to Snap Naab, to the woman pledged in his creed. He meant to free Mescal. If Hare ever breathed a prayer, it was then. What if one of the band awakened? As the rustler turned at the door, his dark face gleamed in the flickering light. He unwound the lasso and opened the door without a sound. Hare whispered, "Heavens, if he goes in she'll scream. That will wake Holderness. Then I must shoot. I must." But the Mormon rustler added wisdom to his cunning and stealth. "Hiss!" he whispered into the cabin. "Hiss!" Mescal must have been awake. She must have guessed instantly the meaning of that low whisper, for silently she appeared in the doorway. Silently she held forth her bound hands. The man untied the bonds and pointed into the cedars toward the corral. Swift and soundless as a flitting shadow, Mescal vanished in the gloom. The Mormon stole with wary, unhurried steps back to his bed and rolled in his blankets. Hare rose unsteadily, wavering in the hot grip of a moment that seemed to have but one issue, the killing of Holderness. Mescal would soon be upon Silvermane, far out on the White Sage trail, and this time there would be no sand strip to trap her. But Hare could not kill the rustler while he was sleeping, and he could not awaken him without revealing to his men the escape of the girl. Hare stood there on the bench, gazing down on the blanketed Holderness. Why not kill him now, ending forever his power, and trust to chance for the rest? No, no. Hare flung the temptation from him. To ward off pursuit as long as possible, to aid Mescal in every way to some safe hiding place, and then to seek Holderness, that was the forethought of a man who had learned to wait. Under the dark projection of the upper cliff, Hare felt his way to the cedar slope and the trail, and then he went swiftly down into the little hollow where he had left Bolly. The darkness of the forest hindered him, but he came at length to the edge of the aspen thicket. He penetrated it, and guided toward Bolly by a suspicious stamp and neigh, he found her and quieted her with a word. He rode down the hollow, out upon the level valley. The clouds had broken somewhat, letting pale light down through rifts. All about him cattle were lying in a thick gloom. It was penetrated for only a few rods. The ground was like a cushion under Bolly's hoofs, giving forth no sound. The mustang threw up her head, causing Hare to peer into the night fog. Rapid hoof beats broke the silence. A vague gray shadow moved into sight. He saw Silvermane and called as loudly as he dared. The stallion melted into the misty curtain. The beating of hoofs softened and ceased. Hare spurred Bolly to her fleetest. He had a long, silent chase, but it was futile and unnecessarily hard on the mustang, so he pulled her in to a trot. Hare kept Bolly to this gait the remainder of the night, and when the eastern sky lightened, he found the trail and reached Seeping Springs at dawn. Silvermane's tracks were deep in the clay at the drinking trough. He rested a few moments, gave Bolly sparingly of grain and water, and once more took to the trail. From the ridge below the spring he saw Silvermane beyond the valley, miles ahead of him. This day seemed shorter than the foregoing one. It passed while he watched Silvermane grow smaller and smaller and disappear on the looming slope of Coconina. Hare's fear that Mescal would run into the riders Holderness expected from his ranch grew less and less after she had reached the cover of the cedars. That she would rest the stallion at the Navajo pool on the mountain he made certain. Late in the night he came to the camping spot and found no trace to prove that she had halted there even to let Silvermane drink. So he tied the tired mustang and slept until daylight. He crossed the plateau and began the descent. Before he was halfway down, the warm bright sun had cleared the valley of vapor and shadow. Far along the winding white trail shone a speck. It was Silvermane, almost out of sight. 10 miles, 15, more maybe, said Hare. Mescal will soon be in the village. Again, hours of travel flew by like winged moments. Thoughts of time, distance, monotony, fatigue, purpose were shut out from his mind. A rushing kaleidoscope dance of images filled his consciousness, but they were all of Mescal. Safety for her had unsealed the fountain of happiness. It was near sundown when he rode Black Bolly into White Sage, and took the back road and the pasture lane to Bishop Caldwell's cottage. John, one of the bishop's sons, was in the barnyard and ran to open the gate. "Mescal!" cried Hare. "Safe," replied the Mormon. "Have you hidden her?" "She's in a secret cave, a Mormon hiding place for women. Only a few men know of its existence. Rest easy, for she's absolutely safe." "Thank God. Then that's settled." Hare drew a long, deep breath. "Mescal told us what happened, how she got caught at the sand strip and escaped from Holderness at Silver Cup. Was Dene hurt?" "Silvermane killed him." "Good God! How things come about! I saw you run Dene down that time here in White Sage. It must have been written. Did Holderness shoot Snap Naab?" "Yes." "What of old Naab? Won't he come down here now to lead us Mormons against the rustlers?" "He called the Navajos across the river. He meant to take the trail alone and kill Holderness, keeping the Indians back a few days. If he failed to return, they were to ride out on the rustlers. But his plan must be changed, for I came ahead of him." "For what? Mescal?" "No, for Holderness." "You'll kill him?" "Yes." "He'll be coming soon. When?" "Tomorrow, possibly by daylight. He wants Mescal. There's a chance Naab may have reached Silver Cup before Holderness left, but I doubt it." "May I know your plan?" The Mormon hesitated, while his strong brown face flashed with daring inspiration. I've got a good reason." "Plan?" "Yes. Hide Bolly and Silvermane in the little arbor down in the orchard. I'll stay outside tonight, sleep a little, for I'm dead tired, and watch in the morning. Holderness will come here with his men, perhaps not openly at first, to drag Mescal away. He'll mean to use strategy. I'll meet him when he comes. That's all." "It's well. I ask you not to mention this to my father. Come in now. You need food and rest. Later I'll hide Bolly and Silvermane in the arbor." Hare met the bishop and his family with composure, but his arrival, following so closely upon Mescal's, increased their alarm. They seemed repelled, yet fascinated by his face. Hare ate in silence. John Caldwell did not come in to supper. His brothers mysteriously left the table before finishing the meal. A subdued murmur of voices floated in at the open window. Darkness found Hare wrapped in a blanket under the trees. He needed sleep that would loose the strange deadlock of his thoughts, clear the blur from his eyes, ease the pain in his head and weariness of limbs, all these weaknesses of which he had suddenly become conscious. Time and again he had almost wooed slumber to him, when soft footsteps on the gravel paths, low voices, the gentle closing of the gate brought him back to the unreal listening wakefulness. The sounds continued late into the night, and when he did fall asleep he dreamed of them. He awoke to a dawn clearer than the light from the noonday sun. In his ears was the ringing of a bell. He could not stand still, and his movements were subtle and swift. His hand took a peculiar, tenacious hold of everything he chanced to touch. He paced his hidden walk behind the arbor, at every turn glancing sharply up and down the road. Thoughts came to him clearly, yet one was dominant. The morning was curiously quiet. The sons of the bishop had strangely disappeared. A sense of imminent catastrophe was in the air. A band of horsemen, closely grouped, turned into the road and trotted forward. Some of the men wore black masks. Holderness rode at the front, his red gold beard shining in the sunlight. The steady clip-clop of hoofs and clinking of iron stirrups broke the morning quiet. Holderness, with two of his men, dismounted before the bishop's gate. The others of the band trotted on down the road. The ring of Holderness's laugh preceded the snap of the gate latch. Hare stood calm and cold behind his green covert, watching the three men stroll up the garden path. Holderness took a cigarette from his lips as he neared the porch and blew out circles of white smoke. Bishop Caldwell tottered from the cottage, rapping the porch floor with his cane. "Good morning, Bishop," greeted Holderness, blandly baring his head. "To you, sir," quavered the old man, with his wavering blue eyes fixed on the spurred and belted rustler. Holderness stepped out in front of his companions, a superb man, courteous, smiling, entirely at his ease. "I rode in to—" Hare leaped from his hiding place. "Holderness!" The rustler pivoted on whirling heels. "Dene's spy!" he exclaimed aghast. Swift changes swept his mobile features. Fear flickered in his eyes as he faced his foe. Then came wonder, a glint of amusement, dark anger, and the terrible instinct of death impending. "Naab's trick!" hissed Hare, with his hand held high. The suggestion in his words, the meaning in his look, held the three rustlers transfixed. The surprise was his strength. In Holderness's amber eyes shone his desperate calculation of chances. Hare's fateful glance, impossible to elude, his strung form slightly crouched, his cold deliberate mention of Naab's trick, and more than all, the poise of that quivering hand, filled the rustler with a terror that he could not hide. He had been bidden to draw, and he could not summon the force. "Naab's trick," repeated Hare mockingly. Suddenly Holderness reached for his gun. Hare's hand leaped like a lightning stroke, gleam of blue, spurt of red, crash. Holderness swayed, with blond head swinging backward. The amber of his eyes suddenly darkened, the life in them glazed. Like a log he fell clutching the weapon he had half drawn. End of chapter 19, part 2. Of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Rage of the Old Lion. "Take Holderness away, quick," ordered Hare. A thin curl of blue smoke floated from the muzzle of his raised weapon. The rustlers started out of their statue-like immobility and, lifting their dead leader, dragged him down the garden path with his spurs clinking on the gravel and plowing little furrows. "Bishop, go in now. They may return," said Hare. He hurried up the steps to place his arm around the tottering old man. "Was that Holderness?" "Yes," replied Hare. "The deeds of the wicked return unto them. God's will." Hare led the bishop indoors. The sitting room was full of wailing women and crying children. None of the young men were present. Again Hare made note of their inexplicable absence. He spoke soothingly to the frightened family. The little boys and girls yielded readily to his persuasion, but the women took no heed of him. "Where are your sons?" asked Hare. "I don't know," replied the bishop. "They should be here to stand by you. It's strange. I don't understand. Last night my sons were visited by many men, coming and going in twos and threes till late. They didn't sleep in their beds. I know not what to think." Hare remembered John Caldwell's enigmatic face. "Have the rustlers really come?" asked a young woman whose eyes were red and cheeks tear stained. "They have. 19 in all. I counted them," answered Hare. The young woman burst out weeping afresh, and the wailing of the others answered her. Hare left the cottage. He picked up his rifle and went down through the orchard to the hiding place of the horses. Silvermane pranced and snorted his gladness at the sight of his master. The desert king was fit for a grueling race. Black Bolly quietly cropped the long grass. Hare saddled the stallion to have him in instant readiness, and then returned to the front of the yard. He heard the sound of a gun down the road, then another, and several shots following in quick succession. A distant angry murmuring and trampling of many feet drew Hare to the gate. Riderless mustangs were galloping down the road. Several frightened boys were fleeing across the square. Not a man was in sight. 3 more shots cracked, and the low murmur and trampling swelled into a hoarse uproar. Hare had heard that sound before. It was the tumult of mob violence. A black dense throng of men appeared crowding into the main street and crossing toward the square. The procession had some order. It was led and flanked by mounted men, but the upflinging of many arms, the craning of necks, and the leaping of men on the outskirts of the mass, the pressure inward, and the hideous roar proclaimed its real character. "By heaven!" exclaimed Hare, "the Mormons have risen against the rustlers. I understand now. John Caldwell spent last night in secretly rousing his neighbors. They have surprised the rustlers. Now what?" Hare vaulted the fence and ran down the road. A compact mob of men, 100 or more, had halted in the village under the wide spreading cottonwoods. Hare suddenly grasped the terrible significance of those outstretched branches, and out of the thought grew another which made him run at bursting breakneck speed. "Open up! Let me in!" he yelled to the thickly thronged circle. Right and left he flung men. "Make way!" His piercing voice stilled the angry murmur. Fierce men with weapons held aloft fell back from his face. "Dene's spy!" they cried. The circle opened and closed upon him. He saw bound rustlers under armed guard. 4 still forms were on the ground. Holderness lay outstretched, a dark red blot staining his gray shirt. Flinty faced Mormons, ruthless now as they had once been mild, surrounded the rustlers. John Caldwell stood foremost, with ashen lips breaking bitterly into speech. "Mormons, this is Dene's spy, the man who killed Holderness." The listeners burst into the short, stern shout of men proclaiming a leader in war. "What's the game?" demanded Hare. "A fair trial for the rustlers, then a rope," replied John Caldwell. The low, ominous murmur swelled through the crowd again. "There are 2 men here who have befriended me. I won't see them hanged." "Pick them out." A strange ripple of emotion made a fleeting break in John Caldwell's hard face. Hare eyed the prisoners. "Nebraska, step out here," said he. "I reckon you're mistaken," replied the rustler, his blue eyes intently on Hare. "I never seen you before, and I ain't the kind of fellow to cheat the man you mean." "I saw you untie the girl's hands." "You did? Well, damn me. Nebraska, if I save your life, will you quit rustling cattle? You weren't cut out for a thief." "Will I? Damn me. I'll be straight and decent. I'll take a job riding for you, stranger, and prove it." "Cut him loose from the others," said Hare. He scrutinized the line of rustlers. Several were masked in black. "Take off those masks." "No, those men go to their graves masked." Again the strange twinge of pain crossed John Caldwell's face. "Ah, I see!" exclaimed Hare. Then quickly, "I couldn't recognize the other man anyhow. I don't know him. But Mescal can tell. He saved her, and I'll save him. But how?" Every rustler, except the masked ones standing stern and silent, clamored that he was the one to be saved. "Hurry back home," said Caldwell in Hare's ear. "Tell them to fetch Mescal. Find out and hurry back. Time presses. The Mormons are wavering. You've got only a few minutes." Hare slipped out of the crowd, sped up the road, jumped the fence on the run, and burst in upon the Bishop and his family. "No danger. Don't be alarmed. All's well," he panted. "The rustlers are captured. I want Mescal. Quick! Where is she? Fetch her, somebody." One of the women glided from the room. Hare caught the clicking of a latch, the closing of a door, hollow footfalls descending on stone and dying away under the cottage. They rose again, ending in swiftly pattering footsteps. Like a whirlwind, Mescal came through the hall, black hair flying, dark eyes beaming. "My darling!" Oblivious of the Mormons, he swung her up and held her in his arms. "Mescal! Mescal!" When he raised his face from the tumbling mass of her black hair, the Bishop and his family had left the room. "Listen, Mescal. Be calm. I'm safe. The rustlers are prisoners. One of them released you from Holderness. Tell me which one." "I don't know," replied Mescal. "I've tried to think. I didn't see his face. I can't remember his voice." "Think, think. He'll be hanged if you don't recall something to identify him. He deserves a chance. Holderness's crowd are thieves, murderers, but two were not all bad. That showed the night you were at Silver Cup. I saved Nebraska." "Were you at Silver Cup, Jack?" "Hush! Don't interrupt me. We must save this man who saved you. Think, Mescal, think." "Oh, I can't. What? How shall I remember? Something about him. Think of his coat, his sleeve. You must remember something. Did you see his hands?" "Yes, I did, when he was loosing the cord," said Mescal eagerly. "Long, strong fingers. I felt them too. He had a sharp, rough wart on one hand. I don't know which. He wears a leather wristband." "That's enough." Hare bounded out upon the garden walk and raced back to the crowded square. The uneasy circle stirred and opened for him to enter. He stumbled over a pile of lassos which had not been there when he left. The stony Mormons waited. The rustlers coughed and shifted their feet. John Caldwell turned a gray face. Hare bent over the three dead rustlers lying with Holderness, and after a moment of anxious scrutiny he rose to confront the line of prisoners. "Hold out your hands." One by one they complied. The sixth rustler in the line, a tall fellow, completely masked, refused to do as he was bidden. Twice Hare spoke. The rustler twisted his bound hands under his coat. "Let's see them," said Hare quickly. He grasped the fellow's arms and received a violent push that almost knocked him over. Grappling with the rustler, he pulled up the bound hands in spite of fierce resistance, and there were the long fingers, the sharp wart, the laced wristband. "Here's my man," he said. "No," hoarsely mumbled the rustler. The perspiration ran down his corded neck. His breast heaved convulsively. "You fool!" cried Hare, dumbfounded and resentful. "I recognize you. Would you rather hang than live? What's your secret?" He snatched off the black mask. The Bishop's eldest son stood revealed. "Good God!" cried Hare, recoiling from that convulsed face. "Brother! Oh, I feared this!" groaned John Caldwell. The rustlers broke out into curses and harsh laughter. "You Mormons! See him! Paul Caldwell, son of a bishop! Thought he was shepherding sheep!" "Damn you, Hare!" shouted the guilty Mormon, in passionate fury and shame. "Why didn't you hang me? Why didn't you bury me unknown?" "Caldwell, I can't believe it!" cried Hare, slowly coming to himself. "But you don't hang. Here, come out of the crowd. Make way, men." The silent crowd of Mormons with lowered and averted eyes made passage for Hare and Caldwell. Then cold, stern voices in sharp questions and orders went on with the grim trial. Leading the bowed and stricken Mormon, Hare drew off to the side of the town hall and turned his back upon the crowd. The constant trampling of many feet, the harsh medley of many voices, swelled into one dreadful sound. It passed away, and a long hush followed. But this in turn was suddenly broken by an outcry. "The Navajos! The Navajos!" Hare thrilled at that cry, and his glance turned to the eastern end of the village road, where a column of mounted Indians, four abreast, were riding toward the square. "Naab and his Indians!" shouted Hare. "Naab and his Indians! No fear!" His call was timely, for the aroused Mormons, ignorant of Naab's pursuit, fearful of hostile Navajos, were handling their guns ominously. But there came a cry of recognition. "August Naab!" Onward came the band, Naab in the lead on his spotted roan. The mustangs were spent and lashed with foam. Naab reined in his charger, and the keen-eyed Navajos closed in behind him. The old Mormon's eagle glance passed over the dark forms dangling from the cottonwoods to the files of waiting men. "Where is he?" "There," answered John Caldwell, pointing to the body of Holderness. "Who robbed me of my vengeance? Who killed the rustler?" Naab's stentorian voice rolled over the listening multitude. In it was a hunger of thwarted hate that held men mute. He bent a downward gaze at the dead Holderness, as if to make sure of the ghastly reality. Then he seemed to rise in his saddle and his broad chest to expand. "I know. I saw it all. Blind I was not to believe my own eyes. Where is he? Where's Hare?" Someone pointed Hare out. Naab swung from his saddle and scattered the men before him as if they had been sheep. His shaggy gray head and massive shoulders towered above the tallest there. Hare felt again a cold sense of fear. He grew weak in all his being. He reeled when the gray shaggy giant laid a huge hand on his shoulder and with one pull dragged him close. Was this his kind Mormon benefactor, this man with the awful eyes? "You killed Holderness!" roared Naab. "Yes," whispered Hare. "You heard me say I'd go alone. You forestalled me. You took upon yourself my work. Speak." "I did." "By what right?" "My debt, duty, your family, Dave." "Boy, you've robbed me." Naab waved his arm from the gaping crowd to the swinging rustlers. "You led these white livered Mormons to do my work. How can I avenge my sons, 7 sons?" His was the rage of the old desert lion. He loosed Hare and strode in magnificent wrath over Holderness, and raised his brawny fists. 18 years I prayed for wicked men," he rolled out. "One by one I buried my sons. I gave my springs and my cattle. Then I yielded to the lust for blood. I renounced my religion. I paid my soul to everlasting hell for the life of my foe. But he's dead, killed by a wild boy. I sold myself to the devil for nothing." August Naab raved out his unnatural rage amid awed silence. His revolt was the flood of years undammed at last. The ferocity of the desert spirit spoke silently in the hanging rustlers, in the ruthlessness of the vigilantes who had destroyed them, but it spoke truest in the sonorous roll of the old Mormon's wrath. "August, young Hare saved 2 of the rustlers," spoke up an old friend, hoping to divert the angry flood. "Paul Caldwell there, he was one of them. The other's gone." Naab loomed over him. "What?" he roared. His friend edged away, repeating his words and jerking his thumb backward toward the bishop's son. "Judas Iscariot!" thundered Naab. False to thyself, thy kin, and thy God. Thrice traitor, why didn't you get yourself killed? Why are you left? Ah, for me, a rustler for me to kill with my own hands. A rope there, a rope." "I wanted them to hang me," hoarsely cried Caldwell, writhing in Naab's grasp. Hare threw all his weight and strength upon the Mormon's iron arm. "Naab, Naab, for God's sake, hear! He saved Mescal. This man, thief, traitor, false Mormon, whatever he is, he saved Mescal." August Naab's eyes were bloodshot. One shake of his great body flung Hare off. He dragged Paul Caldwell across the grass toward the cottonwood as easily as if he were handling an empty grain sack. Hare suddenly darted after him. "August, August, look, look!" he cried. He pointed a shaking finger down the square. The old bishop came tottering over the grass, leaning on his cane, shading his eye with his hand. "August, see, the bishop's coming. Paul's father. Do you hear?" Hare's appeal pierced Naab's frenzied brain. The Mormon elder saw his old bishop pause and stare at the dark shapes suspended from the cottonwoods, and hold up his hands in horror. Naab loosed his hold. His frame seemed wrenched as though by the passing of an evil spirit, and the reaction left his face transfigured. "Paul, it's your father, the bishop," he said brokenly. "Be a man. He must never know." Naab spread wide his arms to the crowd. "Men, listen," he said. "Of all us Mormons I have lost the most, suffered the most. Then hear me. Bishop Caldwell must never know of his son's guilt. He would sink under it. Keep the secret. Paul will be a man again. I know. I see. For Mormons, August Naab has the gift of revelation." End of chapter 20. One of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mescal. Summer gleams of golden sunshine swam under the glistening red walls of the oasis. Shadows from white clouds, like sails on a deep blue sea, darkened the broad fields of alfalfa. Circling columns of smoke were wafted far above the cottonwoods and floated in the still air. The desert red color of Navajo blankets brightened the grove. Half-naked bronze Indians lolled in the shade, lounged on the cabin porches, and stood about the sunny glade in idle groups. They wore the dress of peace. A single black-tipped white eagle feather waved above the band binding each black head. They watched the merry children tumble round the playground. Silvermane browsed where he listed under the shady trees, and many a sinewy red hand caressed his flowing mane. Black Bolly neighed her jealous displeasure from the corral, and the other mustangs trampled and kicked and whistled defiance across the bars. The peacocks preened their gorgeous plumage and uttered their clarion calls. The belligerent turkey gobblers sidled about, ruffling their feathers. The blackbirds and swallows sang and twittered their happiness to find old nests in the branches and under the eaves. Over all boomed the dull roar of the Colorado in flood. It was the morning of Mescal's wedding day. August Naab, for once without a task, sat astride a peeled log of driftwood in the lane, and Hare stood beside him. 5,000 steers, lad. Why do you refuse them? They're worth $10 a head today in Salt Lake City. A good start for a young man." "No, I'm still in your debt." "Then share alike with my sons in work and profit." "Yes, I can accept that." "Good, Jack. I see happiness and prosperity for you. Do you remember that night on the White Sage Trail? Ah, well, the worst is over. We can look forward to better times. It's not likely the rustlers will ride into Utah again, but this desert will never be free from strife." "Tell me of Mescal," said Hare. "Ah, yes, I'm coming to that. Naab bent his head over the log and chipped off little pieces with his knife. "Jack, will you come into the Mormon church?" Long Hare had shrunk from this question which he felt must inevitably come, and now he met it as bravely as he could, knowing he would pain his friend. "No, August, I can't," he replied. "I feel differently from Mormons about women. If it wasn't for that, I look upon you as a father. I'll do anything for you except that. No one could pray to be a better man than you. Your work, your religion, your life. Why, I've no words to say what I feel. Teach me what little you can of them, August, but don't ask me that." "Well, well," sighed Naab. The gray clearness of his eagle eyes grew shadowed, and his worn face was sad. It was the look of a strong, wise man who seemed to hear doubt and failure knocking at the gate of his creed. But he loved life too well to be unhappy. He saw it too clearly not to know there was nothing wholly good, wholly perfect, wholly without error. The shade passed from his face like the cloud shadow from the sunlit lane. "You ask about Mescal," he mused. "There's little more to tell." "But her father, can you tell me more of him?" "Little more than I've already told. He was evidently a man of some rank. I suspected that he ruined his life and became an adventurer. His health was shattered when I brought him here, but he got well after a year or so. He was a splendid, handsome fellow. He spoke very seldom, and I don't remember ever seeing him smile. His favorite walk was the river trail. I came upon him there one day and found him dying. He asked me to have a care of Mescal, and he died muttering a Spanish word, a woman's name, I think." "I'll cherish Mescal the more," said Hare. "Cherish her, yes. My Bible will this day give her a name. We know she has the blood of a great chief. Beautiful she is and good. I raised her for the Mormon church. But God disposes after all, and I—" A shrill screeching sound split the warm stillness, the long drawn out bray of a burro. "Jack, look down the lane, if it isn't Noddle." Under the shady line of the red wall a little gray burro came trotting leisurely along, with one long brown ear standing up straight, the other hanging down over his nose. "By George, it's Noddles!" exclaimed Hare. "He's climbed out of the canyon. Won't this please Mescal?" "Hey, Mother Mary," called Naab toward the cabin. "Send Mescal out. Here's a wedding present." With laughing wonder the women folk flocked out into the yard. Mescal hung back, shy-eyed, roses dyeing the brown of her cheeks. "Mescal's wedding present from Thunder River just arrived," called Naab cheerily, yet deep-voiced with the happiness he knew the tidings would give. "A dusty, dirty, shaggy, starved, lop-eared, lazy burro, Noddle." Mescal flew out into the lane, and with a strange broken cry of joy that was half a sob, she fell upon her knees and clasped the little burro's neck. Noddle wearily flapped his long brown ears, wearily nodded his white nose, then, evidently considering the incident closed, he went lazily to sleep. "Noddle, dear old Noddle," murmured Mescal, with far-seeing, thought-marrowing eyes. "For you to come back today from our canyon! Oh, the long dark nights with the thunder of the river and the lonely voices! They come back to me. Wolf, Wolf, here's Noddle, the same faithful old Noddle." August Naab married Mescal and Hare at noon under the shade of the cottonwoods. Eschtah, magnificent in robes of state, stood up with them. The many members of Naab's family and the grave Navajos formed an attentive circle around them. The ceremony was brief. At its close the Mormon lifted his face and arms in characteristic invocation. "Almighty God, we entreat thy blessings upon this marriage. Many and inscrutable are thy ways, strange are the workings of thy will. Wondrous the purpose with which thou hast brought this man and this woman together. Watch over them in the new path they are to tread. Help them in the trials to come, and in thy good time, when they have reached the fullness of days, when they have known the joy of life and rendered their service, gather them to thy bosom in that eternal home where we all pray to meet. Thy chosen ones of good, yea, and the evil ones purified in thy mercy. Amen. Happy congratulations of the Mormon family, a merry romp of children flinging flowers, marriage dance of singing Navajos. These, with the feast spread under the cottonwoods, filled the warm noon hours of the day. Then the chief Eschtah raised his lofty form and turned his eyes upon the bride and groom. Eschtah's 100 summers smile in the face of youth. The arm of the white chief is strong. The kiss of the flower of the desert is sweet. Let Mescal and Jack rest their heads on one pillow and sleep under the trees and chant when the dawn brightens in the east. Out of his wise years, the Navajo bids them love while they may. Daughter of my race, take the blessing of the Navajo. Jack lifted Mescal upon Black Bolly and mounted Silvermane. Piute grinned till he shook his earrings and started the pack burros toward the plateau trail. Wolf pattered on before, turning his white head, impatient of delay. Amid tears and wavings of hands and cheers, they began the zigzag ascent. When they reached the old camp on the plateau, the sun was setting behind the painted desert. With hands closely interwoven, they watched the color fade and the mustering of purple shadows. Twilight fell. Piute raked the red coals from the glowing center of the campfire. Wolf crouched all his long, white length, his sharp nose on his paws, watching Mescal. Hare watched her too. The night shone in her eyes, the light of the fire, the old brooding, mystic desert spirit, and something more. The thump of Silvermane's hobbled hoofs was heard in the darkness. Bolly's bell jangled musically. The sheep were bleating. A lonesome coyote barked. The white stars blinked out of the blue, and the night breeze whispered softly among the cedars. End of chapter 21. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. End of The Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey.